Let's go over the assignment for round 5P. Question number 1 was, if we were to play a round 6P, which we won't, but how many units would need to be produced to meet demand in the traditional segment? Keep in mind that some companies have more than one product in the traditional segment. So calculate the demand for next year. Sorry, get past my stuttering. So if we cruise down and we look at the traditional segment, I'm going to scroll down. We're getting there. Traditional segment analysis. So our total industry unit demand for this year was 9,747,000, and next year's segment growth rate is a positive 0.2%. So positive 0.2%, decimal wise, is 0.002. Okay, so we do our math, and it's simply taking the last year's demand, or 5P's demand, which was 9,747,000, times 1 plus 0.002, and that equals 9,766,000. It was pretty close. It might have been rounded up to 767,000. Okay, so either one of those would probably be correct. And for the second part then of that, I said just calculate the inventory in units. And if you go down each and every team, and using the production analysis up here is probably the easiest way, you can see the units that they have in those traditional segments. So 549, 90, etc., etc. Okay, that gives us then a total of 8,819,000 units. So what's the difference? 947,000. Okay, I asked this question for a very specific reason. You know, we ended up with a lot of inventory, and making plans, budgeting, looking at next year, you need to take that into consideration. Okay, it should be a part of your calculation. Do you absolutely have to add it up every single time for each segment? Nah, but you ought to eyeball it and have a pretty good idea of what kind of inventory is out there. But you also have to take into consideration, for example, Bold, if I remember right, is not a competitive product. It's not in the, and let me go down. I don't know where Bold ended up. I think it was out of favor, if I remember right, because its MTBF was too low to even make it saleable. At least in the performance segment, it could be sold perhaps in the traditional segment, but it's kind of just barely at that edge, right? I think it only sold 6 units. So you would have to take into consideration the fact that, you know, that product and maybe some of the others, you know, aren't that well suited. But nonetheless, it should give you an overall view that, boy, there's a lot of inventory in this segment, and I need to consider that when I'm making my projections for next round. 2, what are the marginal variable costs of all the low-end products? Erie has 3, just the products that are classified as low-end on the production analysis. So, you know, sometimes a traditional product might sell in the low end, for example. What do I mean when I ask about marginal costs? So, again, if you go down, and we'll take a look at it, acre at least, and maybe bead, but if you go down through the production analysis, is the best place to get this. Got to get to the right spot. And acre is our low-end product for Team Andrews, and I'm looking for the marginal cost. Well, it's this. Okay, this is my marginal cost, or the cost that it was for me to build the very last unit. And for acre, it's just about $4 and $9.91, so it'd be $13.91 minus 2 cents, so $13.89 is what I should have, right? Hopefully I did the math correctly. Okay, and if we look at bead, then, you know, look at the same thing. Little different way of getting there, but their costs are very similar. That you got 13 plus that, so 13.74, if I'm not mistaken. Man, isn't that? Yeah. Huh. is just looking at the difference in the material costs, looking at that and coming up with the reason why the material cost is so much different. It would be coordinates, right? Acres and older, or I shouldn't say older, but its performance is much less and its size is much bigger than bead, so that would make it a lot cheaper. And the age too, it's a little bit older, but mainly it's that performance and size coordinates would make it a cheaper product, which in some segments, may not be that big of a deal. I mean, Acre still sold 1,838 units versus bead 620 units. So, okay, so you go through each one of those, and again, here I asked this for a very specific reason, and that is if you look at the cost here for cedar, okay, I would say this, that cedar, we talked about what their strategy was, and turns out it was low, broad. It was a broad, low-cost provider. I would say that it was not aggressive at all. I've told you guys you should be aggressive, okay, or at least only modestly aggressive, and yet it still has a cost, a variable cost, marginal variable cost that's significantly over, feet's the next closest, and it's still 2.25 away. Okay, so it's significantly cheaper for cedar to build products. And keep in mind that cedar's using a second shift, right? Okay, it's using 55% overtime in that particular category, okay, and yet it's still able to produce it at a very inexpensive cost, okay? And again, it was only modest. I have seen these costs get down, even in the practice rounds, much less than that, but in the competitive rounds, especially by the 8th round, much, much, much less than that. So what is marginal cost? Again, it's the cost to make the very last unit or the very next unit, semantics there. And that's what that chart gives us on the production analysis. So what's the marginal contribution margin for products cedar in dollars and cents and percentage? And their sale price is $18.50, okay, minus their variable cost, both of them, which is actually $8.70, gives us a dollar, okay, contribution margin. Normally we'd call that a gross profit. Yeah, I would typically refer to that as gross profit of $9.80. And so as a percentage, it's 53%. And I threw that in just as kind of a reminder. If you look on here, it says its contribution margin was only 51%. Well, why? Well, they probably had some inventory left over. They did, if you went back and looked, that they sold, that it actually was a little, that they had previously made, so it actually was a little bit more expensive for them to make. And so it brought their marginal contribution margin is 53%, but it brought their overall contribution margin down a couple of percent. Not a big deal, but demonstration as to why that's a little bit different. 4, what is the total amount of inventory in dollars on hand for all teams versus total sales for round 5? I ask because the total sales estimated for round 6, bad grammar there, I think that should say will be very close to those for round 5P. And the way I did it, I just went to the income statement. Okay, I'm sorry, the balance sheet first, because you can do the inventory. And I just highlighted this and copy, and then I pasted it into an Excel sheet. Boom. Let the Excel do the sum, okay, of those numbers, right? And I did the same thing for sales, and so I came up with those numbers. Once again, I just wanted to point out, I mean, that's about 40%, just about exactly 40% of the projected sales we're already holding in inventory, okay? And so taking existing inventory into consideration is extremely important when you're making your projections for the next round. There you have it, the answers for the assignment of round 5P.